Hello, my name's Cliff. This is Cliff Can Cash, where we're going to talk about investing and basically just me talking. I feel like I've learned a lot, probably not enough. I have no qualifications for any of this. I'm just a guy who enjoys studying businesses. Before we start talking about investments though, we have to talk about some things that you shouldn't do. Like you shouldn't lose money basically. Losing money is bad. The way compounding works is if you have some amount of something and then you put it into a process and that process gives you out more of that thing, then you can take the more of that thing and put it back in and keep going. They talk about a snowball. You start at the top of a hill with a snowball. You start with like a tiny amount of snow. I've actually never done this because I'm from Florida. If it rolls down, as it turns, every turn of the snowball picks up a little bit more snow. It creates a little bit more weight. It creates a little bit more area. It's helpful to think of little metaphors like this because money can be a little abstract. It can be a little ephemeral. This is going to lead into one of the things I want to talk about today, which is debt. Let's start by trying to think of a debt, right? So you have like a student loan or a credit card debt, or like you just borrowed money from someone and there's some interest rate on the loan, right? So you have to pay some amount back. Imagine a loan where you would be happy not paying it back. Not like, oh no, how am I going to pay this back? And you're stressed about it. It's like, I have this loan, I am in debt, it doesn't bother me. For instance, if we look at the extremes, if I take a loan and it has 100% interest rate, that's like really bad. You don't want to do that. Assuming you needed the money to begin with, how are you going to get twice as much to pay them, right? You have to double their money in some amount of time. It's really difficult to do. On the other hand, if you got a really small loan, like 0%, you would never have to pay that back. Let's say that the US Treasury bond right now is at like 4%. And someone gives you a loan for 3%. You take as much of that 3% as you can, you immediately buy bonds with it, you make 1% on whatever amount of money they can loan you, right? And you can just never pay that back. We broaden that out a little bit more, and instead of a bond, we buy a stock that pays a 4% dividend. It's a similar thing, a little more risky. That's basically the premise of how I would think about it. Some people will think that, oh, I need to start investing. Like I've got some money, I need to start getting ahead. What stock should I buy? Right? Like what should I buy? Tesla? Should I buy Berkshire? What should I do with my money? I'm not giving financial advice. I'm not a professional, disclaimer. Not a professional disclaimer either. I'm new to this. If you have credit card debt that you're paying like 27% on, that's huge. That's crazy. It's really difficult to find imagine finding a stock with a 27% dividend. No one can invest money with a guarantee at 27%. If you have a 27% interest rate, you can pay that down, and that is a guarantee, right? You have definitely gotten 27% back because you're no longer paying it. We go back to the snowball where it's, if someone stopped your snowball right at the beginning, that'd be terrible. It would never reach its full size. There's one way that you can think about, sort of your life is if you can manage to squint and see your life as a business, like me, myself, am a business, I can incur personal debt. That's the thing I can do. That's the thing businesses can do. Why would I do that? It would not be to like buy ice cream that would melt. It would be to buy maybe an ice cream shop that I could sell ice cream to other people. We can say, hey, I, as an individual, have a unique perspective on the world where I have an opportunity no one else has. And that opportunity, I'm pretty sure, with some margin of safety, will yield me more than this loan amount. That means that we are in a similar situation to the dividend stock being higher than the interest rate. So we can take as much of that loan as we're comfortable with and then put it towards the business. Hopefully the business works out, but we can take those loans and we can make them productive loans. You can do that in your life too, right? I can take a loan out, not necessarily monetarily, but I can take out a loan, like I can drink this coffee, and this coffee will give me some alertness right now. It might make it harder for me to sleep later, but I'm borrowing against my future. Being aware that there's a decision there that you're making is like half the battle. If I was in debt right now, I would not be looking for stocks. I would not be looking for bonds. I would be trying to make as much money as I can, trying to get out of that debt, because it's really hard to start snowballing when you're in debt. I might be a little bit crazy about this, but this is sort of how I think about it. It makes me really anxious. If you're in debt and that debt isn't good debt, it's not producing, it's not like the ice cream shop where we're profiting off of it and we're like happy to take more, you basically are broke. You don't have any money. Because why else would you need the debt, right? You're just trying to have more of what you don't have. It's a bit silly to buy something that doesn't do anything for you. You can start to get a feel for like what good debt and bad debt looks like and how to use it and how to take it on. It's sort of like a little league version of looking at a real business out there that's publicly traded that you can take a part in and judging them. If you start buying a business and you have no idea how debt works, you're going to be at a disadvantage because you have no experience with that. And then it's extra helpful because once you realize what you're looking at, you can say, okay, this is the nominal debt. This is what they have listed as debt. But what other debts are they taking? Are they taking technical debt? Like, how are they burning out their employees? What are the costs of the things I'm doing right now to the future? At the same time that you're paying down this debt to get back to an even point where you can have principal and you can have these thoughts that you might be having right now, which is like, where do I put my money? What stocks do I buy? How do I get ahead? You have to get to that point. And once you're at that point, you'll have this experience now that lets you look at businesses and say, oh, this is how they're managing their debt. This is what management is doing with the money. And one of the other things you have to look at is when is the debt due? Because if you're in debt to someone, you owe them. You literally owe them. So you have to be aware of when they're allowed to call on that. Like, when are they allowed to come up to you and say, hey, give me my money? And it's just not fun. Like, who wants to live their life like that? It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Everything that you worry about takes away from your thoughts. We have to be good guardians of our mental real estate. If you have these debts and they're worrying you and they're bogging you down, you're borrowing against your future self because you're not thinking thoughts that could profit you in the future. If I'm worried about a debt, I'm not able to think about getting ahead. So especially if the time that the debt would come up and come due is short, it's a short time frame. If I take a 6-month loan for my ice cream shop and I set it up at the end of summer, right when winter is starting, that might be a problem, right? It might be a while until I'm able to make some profits. And if they can call on that loan before I'm able to start selling ice cream, they're gonna come take my shop. Debt can be so insidious because it's like, it's not even there. You can't grab it, right? There's not a hole that you put money into and then the debt's gone. It feels so easy. It's like someone that starts eating cake. It's once you've had a taste of it, you want more because it's so easy. It's so easy to do. The downsides are in the future, and it's really hard with our lizard brains to tell the downside is in the future. It's still real, it's just over there. It's just in my future. Eventually you gotta pay the price, and it's gonna hurt, and you're not gonna like it, and it's gonna hurt that much more because you're in this state of enjoyment, of ecstasy, and you're not gonna want to, you don't even want to go back to baseline, much less negative. And this is when you see people where they're like taking a credit card to pay off a credit card and all that, and it's like, that's the instinct that kicks in. So you have this first layer of instinct where you take on the debt, and then you have the second layer of instinct where you're like, guess I'll just take on more debt to pay off this debt. In the same way that it's gonna feel really bad when you stop eating the cake and then you get back to baseline, it's gonna feel extra good the next cycle because you're gonna have more than you started with. You're gonna have more than you're used to because you're not paying that interest rate anymore, and that's gonna be great. And then you can realize like, oh, I can actually get ahead now. What happened to me is I do that. It's like, okay, it's not a lot, right? It's not a lot, but it's something. It's something. And then the next time it comes around, you're like, ooh, it's a little bit more. Fast forward a couple of years, and you're like, oh wow, these are like real numbers. If someone else was in this situation and you care about them and they just had a bad loan and they said, hey, this person is here, they're kicking me out of my apartment unless I pay them rent right now. Do you have some money I can borrow? And you say, you know what? I know you're good for it. Yes, that's fine. Don't worry about it. Just pay me back on your next paycheck whenever you can. I got you, right? You want to be able to say, I got you. If the business is not treating their creditors well and they're not paying their debts, how is their relationship with the customer going to be? It's essentially a promise. And if I promise the customer that, you know, your car is not going to blow up if you get rear-ended, how can they know that that's true? If you don't keep your promises, if you don't do what you say you're going to do, you can think of selling a product as a promise. I give you this cup. I say, this will hold your coffee every morning. If there's a hole in the bottom of the cup and it comes in the box, I say, what? I'm never buying from these people again. If you are like me and you lived in some lowland place like Florida where the air is pretty thick, and you go to the top of a mountain and the air gets real thin and it's hard to breathe, and you're like, man, what is happening? Right? That's sort of what happens with credit. You don't have to waste any time thinking about much decisions. Is this stock better than this stock? Should I be in bonds? Should I be in gold? Any of that. It's like, pay your debt off. If you're up on a mountain and you can't really breathe the air there because you're not acclimated, you can just try, you can be like, I need to go down. I need to go off of this mountain. The less time you have to think about where you're putting your money, the more time you can spend, doing normal human being stuff, but also making more money. You can think of these debts as obligations, right? Once you get used to paying off these debts, and then you look at a business, you'll realize like, oh, this company pays a 7% dividend. That's a big dividend. That looks appetizing. But then you realize they promised to pay that. They promised to pay that like a year ago, and they're promising to pay it in perpetuity. Like they're promised to pay it next year, year after that. Shouldn't it just be based off of how well they're doing? Wouldn't that make more sense? Are they just like doing so well that they can project this forward forever? No, they just made an obligation. They don't know that they can meet that obligation, but they're going to. In that way, what is just an obligation, which is theoretically a debt, becomes a real debt, because they might have to take on an interest-bearing loan to pay off those dividends that they promised. If you didn't have the means to make the money to pay the dividend to begin with, how are you going to have the means to make the money to pay the interest rate and the dividend next year? You took on the debt probably when you were in a bad situation, when one of these bumps in the road came along. And once you've paid off the debt and you're looking for businesses, once you are making that stock decision of what businesses should I buy, you can say, this company got in debt here because this thing happened. There was a recession. There was supply chain issues, whatever. From there, you can make a value decision. Oh, this is bad. They're not going to be able to pay this. This is the business is severely damaged from this. This is a real cost. Or this is a blip. This is a thing. It's they had to do it. They got blindsided. It happens to anyone. They're going to have to cut back a little. In the end, they're going to be fine. And that's the thing that you can do, because it's just like what happened to you in your life. If you get a debt, immediately, oh, this is bad. This is bad for me. I need to do something. Or you get a debt and you're like, okay, this is gonna suck, but it's gonna be okay. I'm not in danger. I'm not risking personal bankruptcy from this. Let's say you find a 27% investment, like it's a bond, for some reason has a 27% coupon. It's ridiculous. Let's say it's true. And then you have this 27%, credit card debt. You would want to pay the debt still. As good as this is, as good as that coupon is, you would still want to pay the debt, because it's just like, you don't have to worry about it. Part of what I'm doing as an investor is honing the craft, I guess. And part of that is collecting these tools that you can use, right? If I know a certain sector, a certain industry, or a certain company, and they get into a situation that I'm familiar with, right? If they get into this debt situation that I've lived personally, and I can look at it and recognize, like, yes, that is it. That's exactly what I went through. Where are they at? I understand the situation they're in. I understand the business they're in. I'm equipped to make a decision here. A lot of the time, it's going to work out to where it's like, oh, okay, everyone else has also figured this out. You don't have to do anything. But sometimes they do it wrong. And they do it wrong in either direction. They could be overconfident, and you can just be like, there was a chance here, but everyone else went in the wrong direction, so I'm going to stay away. And sometimes you get this rare moment, which we hunt for, where things go down, things get cheaper, and you can look at it and say, like, no, they are wrong. The arrogance of betting against these thousands of people that are so smart, it's like, okay, they're very smart, but they're also wrong. There's a really good Charlie Munger quote where he says, you're smart and I'm right. So if you think about it long enough, you'll realize I'm right. Once you pay off the debt, you can look back and say, wow, those were real mistakes. Those were bad. I'm not going to do those again. I'm not even going to get close to doing those again. I'm going to take a wide berth around those mistakes, or the things that would lead to those mistakes, or the things that would lead to those mistakes. And through that, you've pushed yourself to raise your standards. It might not feel like it at the time, but having some debt in your personal life that you've battled through and you've experienced, it can make you money in the long run. It can keep you from falling into the trap of taking on debt and then not getting punished, and taking on debt and not getting punished. Let's say you take on a little bit of debt, you dabble a little, and then it works, and you're like, ooh, that was good. And you dabble a little more and it works, and you keep going and it keeps working, and you're like, what's the downside here? And then one day it crushes you and it just slams you through the floor. And that's how a lot of people, their careers are gone. Whenever there's a situation where there's an upfront cost, you know what the cost is. But if there's a situation where there's no upfront cost, it's just gain, immediate gain, and the cost comes way later, it helps to have been in a situation where you got an immediate gain and then the cost came way later and you paid for it and you didn't like it. Because now in this other deal, you can look at it and say like, okay, what's the catch? Oh, I see. There's a high interest loan waiting for me over there. I'm gonna pass. You can just rely on the power of compounding. You don't have to find the steepest hill with the best snow. That's what you're looking for, but you don't have to find it, because that might be up on top of the mountain where you can't breathe and you might fall and it's very dangerous up there. Just finding something good enough over a long enough runway is good enough. The way you get the most return is to take on all the debt you can and just put it on black and be right. And being right is the key there, because if you're wrong, you've just ruined so much. And the importance of that is that you realize you don't have to do the thing that gets you the most return. A solid return enough times is great. It's enough. This is a bit of a weird format for me. If you like it, let me know. I'll keep doing it. If not, also let me know. I'll stop doing it. I had fun. See you next time.